and welcome to the first episode of DisruptEd. DisruptEd is a platform that is meant to challenge the status quo of the education industry, the status quo of the education experience, and the outcomes of it. My name is Dr. Adil Alzarooni. I'm a serial entrepreneur coming from multiple industries, and now we are challenging the education industry. Going through my own experience in evolving institution in the education industry, I've realized that DisruptEd is a platform that is necessary to bring in bright minds that will help enhance the education experience and make it more relevant for the realities of the world. So today, in the first episode, we are receiving Raya Bidshahri, the founder of the School of Humanity. Very interesting concept, very interesting individual. She will kindly today share her thoughts and her experience, and we'll have a very interesting discussion.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
School of Humanity. That's a very interesting name. Why? Why School of Humanity?
When I was ideating School of Humanity, I knew that, like you said, I wanted the goal of the school to be what the goal of education should be, to use education as a tool for human progress, and that the curriculum would be centered around global challenges. And with that in mind, the name just made a lot of sense to call it the School of Humanity.
Some background. And how did it come to be that passion?
Yeah, I think so. With the background, I didn't grow up thinking I wanted to go into education or become an educator or start a school one day. It wasn't part of the plan that I had envisioned. But my direction or pivot into the education system came very much out of my own frustration with the schooling system. So I grew up here in the UAE, and like many students around the world, went into a British education model. And to some extent, sometimes I was a great straight A student and sometimes I wasn't. But around the time I was in high school, I discovered entrepreneurship, and I discovered learning by doing things. I discovered learning through projects and actually going out to the real world, having an impact and learning as a byproduct of that. And all of a sudden, my grades dropped. And academically, I didn't care for sitting down and memorizing as much. So that became one of the first sparks into realizing I like to learn in a different way. And so that pain continued for me within the university experience that I had as well. Constantly memorizing textbook after textbook, taking an exam and then forgetting everything that I had learned. Don't get me started on how expensive the whole ordeal was as well. All of that was just extremely painful. And I'm someone who loves to learn. I've always been a voracious reader, watching documentaries and so on. So it was very difficult for me. And really the way I coped with that difficulty was by pivoting into education and actually trying to change things and do things differently. There were schools emerging from around the world, especially in the United States, schools that were creating an entirely new approach to learning, that were designing a new curriculum, that were teaching through projects, that were teaching through interdisciplinary curriculum, but that approach hadn't scaled globally for various reasons, which we can talk about. But that opened up this inspiration and opportunity to take those proven models that have been around for decades now, move them into the online world, and open them up to the world. So the name comes from several levels, really. One is School of Humanity, like really opening this up to all human beings around the world. And at a deeper level, it comes to human progress and using education as a tool to create an exciting future for humanity and contribute to the flourishing of both our species and our planet.
It's a very similar story to mine, and hence I'm going to ask you the questions that I had to ask myself also. So in building School of Humanity, what are the challenges that you thought you were trying to solve?
There's many issues. And the challenge with there being many issues is that there isn't going to be one solution or school to solve them. I think different schools will cater to different human beings, and I'll come to that in a second, but there's issues with the curriculum. There's issues with what we're teaching young minds. There was a recent report by Rewire that 60% of learners believe that the current curriculum is just not preparing them for the workforce. There's similar data coming from an organization called H&R Block, where 84% of the information that we learn in schools are actually useful to us later in life. So there's issues with what we're learning in schools. Then there's issues with how we're learning them. Right? If you look at the traditional way that a school course or even a university course is constructed, you have an educator-led course with modules of knowledge that build up on each other, and 90% of the time you might have a closed book, time-bound, paper-based exam at the end. So that whole approach and pedagogy is so disconnected from reality, which is more interdisciplinary and complex, and learn as you need it. And so there's issues with what we're learning, how we're learning, and then there's issues with access and what's driving the incentives of learning. As a result of the fact that the things that are getting measured really come from standardized tests and exams, the system ends up driving so much time and energy towards memorization. Because even if the questions in the A levels or the AP are application-based, you still have to memorize textbooks of information to be able to retain them and retrieve them in that moment. So we just end up incentivizing the wrong thing that actually we need for today's world.
Well, why do you consider it wrong?
It's not that knowledge isn't important. I absolutely believe that we need to have awareness of knowledge. But in a world where we're producing billions of gigabytes of information every day, and we have a world of information at our fingerprints, putting the emphasis on memorization rather than application, analysis, creation is the wrong approach. I mean, think about our everyday experience in most careers. We don't have to remember textbooks worth of information, right? What we need to know is how to find that information, how to critically analyze it, how to apply it, and then how to use it to solve problems. And there's just this big disconnect between the way we're assessing young minds, what actually is the requirement from a skills perspective for today's world.
When we've decided to build Citizens as a school, as I, for the first time, got into the need to develop curriculums, noticed and understood the reason the current education system exists the way it is, and I felt sad. I felt sad in that it's no longer relevant, in my opinion, in many ways, to what needs, as an industry, it needs to be. The education system today, in my opinion, existed due to an event that happened around 200, almost 30 years ago. So vaccination was invented a few years I think it was 1796. And what that has led to is a boom in human population. So it took us as a species around 300,000 years to get to our first 1 billion. And it was in 1800. And only 220 years after that, we are at 8 billion. So countries and economies had to deal with a huge influx of a population. They needed to grow the necessary infrastructure to cater for them. Lots of roads, lots of hospitals, lots of schools, lots of factories, methods to produce in mass, and so on and so forth. And hence, they needed a lot of employees, basically, that will be able to build the roads, to operate the schools, the hospitals, and everything that goes around that. And hence, they needed a lot of the same. And as everything was industrialized out of necessity, schools were also industrialized out of necessity. Okay? They needed to graduate a lot of the same. But then you realize that schools' objectives, the existence of schools, were not about your well-being and your individual quality of life and your individual skill sets and ambitions in life. It was not about that. They did not have the privilege to do so. They needed to produce a lot of the same. But that is stalling now because human population, most of the human population growth moving forward, actually started a couple of years ago, is predominantly through aging, not newborns. So statistics indicate that humans as a population will plateau circa 2080. It might arrive to anywhere between 10 and 11 billion. But the difference is that today, human population above 65 years old are around 10%. By then, by 2080, it will be circa 25%. What is the education system necessary to produce generations that will handle the new realities of economy? I mean, once you realize that human population growth is going to go through that trend, there are many socio-economic concepts that will need to change. So public market multiples, pension programs, the concept of retirement is no longer there. Concept of going through an X amount of years of learning and then working and then not learn again and again and reskill yourself will need to change. So a lot of concepts that will change the face of humanity are, I wouldn't say it's coming in the future, we are living the future now. So this is what drives me, and to wanting to make sure that we understand the reality that we will face and future generations will face. And it's our duty, I believe, and this is what I love in what you're doing, is to prepare future generations for the reality of the world, of the upcoming world. So with saying that, how do you envision, or what do you envision are to be the skills that future generations will need, and how does the School of Humanity deliver on them?
Yeah, it's a really profound thought, what you just described, because obviously the world is changing so fast and we need a new paradigm of education. And as you were speaking, it just occurred to me the importance of opening up our imaginations, both when we think about the future as well as the education system. There's a concept in entrepreneurship, which I'm sure you're deeply familiar with, which is first principles thinking, right? Like not using the status quo to guide our innovations, but actually starting from scratch and saying, if we had to start from zero to solve a problem that exists today, what would that look like? And when it came to curriculum development, that's how my team and I tried to approach it. We said, first of all, what's the goal of education? Which is tiered. On one hand, it's to enable a human being to flourish in life. On another, it's to equip them to tackle the challenges, the complex challenges that are emerging in the next 100 years. It's to contribute to human progress. So that's what we agreed to be the goal of education, and different humans might have different goals. And then we asked ourselves, okay, with those goals in mind, what are the knowledge, skills, mindsets that human beings need to contribute to us fulfilling those goals? The way we like to set up a framework for these future skills or future capabilities is around something called literacy. The OECD defines literacy as a combination of knowledge, skills, and mindset. So if you have financial literacy, you have a bit of the knowledge, the skills, and the dispositions from a behavioral perspective to be financially literate. And we narrowed it down ultimately with lots of research into, reports about the skills of the future, as well as first principles thinking on 8 literacies. And they include things like creativity, action, so anything around problem solving, thought, flourishing, quantitative skills, discovery, which goes all around scientific invention, and as well as society as well. Within those, you have still the hints of scientific thinking and language skills and quantitative skills. And I highlight those because people always ask us, do you still teach English, math, science in your school? And yes, they're taught, but they're taught in a completely different way. They're taught as skills, not as things that you memorize, but as skills that you learn. But equally important for us, in order to prepare young minds for this new paradigm of the world, are skills like systems thinking, understanding the complexity of different systems and how feedback loops work and how changing things in one system has an intended and unintended consequence on another system. So that's a critical skill to include in core curriculum.
Would you give me an example of that? Because, I see that a lot of educators refer to the same. And I think to make it easier for the audience to understand what are we referring to, I would love if you would give a few examples on what are the skills that you think needs to be induced in the upcoming generations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So one of my favorite ways to teach and learn systems thinking is actually through nature and sciences. So there's actually a great resource on this that educators can access. Farnham Street, which is this intellectual blog, takes mental models from physics, biology, and chemistry. So by mental models, we mean concepts like evolution, or concepts like I said, feedback loop, when increasing something contributes to an increase and you have that exponential increase as a result, from different sciences, and they apply them to society. And you say, okay, knowing what we know about feedback loops in nature, how does it manifest in another part of the world, in societal part of the world? Another way to think about systems is, within science, is to think about life systems. So instead of teaching a cell as a cell, teaching it as a system. You have a system, a cell within another system, which is our body, which is also within another system, which is society. And in order to truly teach systems thinking, you also have to take an interdisciplinary approach, which means not teaching a subject in isolation, but allowing the connections with other disciplines to emerge. And it also connects to complexity science, which is understanding how nothing happens in isolation, how one thing in one system can have a ripple effect on multiple layers of systems. So that's just the one example.
Before asking you about the education experience of the School of Humanity, and which is predominantly a digital experience, may I ask you, what is it that you hope to produce?
Our vision ultimately is to create an alternative education system that contributes to the flourishing of humans and the planet. So, and we already actually are seeing...
And what do you consider as flourished human, if I may?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're already seeing a few beautiful examples, and I'm going to share a couple of our learners and what they're working on. So one of our learners, who's now an alum, Arthur, was fighting for intergenerational justice in Wales. So he was part of the UNICEF Youth Advisory Board, and pioneering this kind of intergenerational policy making, which is all around governments setting policies and laws, not only thinking about the present, but future generations and ensuring it's fair to them. We have another learner, Brielle, who has been working on a circular economy app, connecting fertilizer companies to restaurants in order to minimize food waste.
I'll give you an example of when I'm asked the question, like, Adil, what is it that you would like to achieve? And being the kind of guy that likes to focus on like very specific outcomes, being an engineer and then getting into business, I say, I hope that the education experience that I provide through citizens is that I'm able to help produce a generation that knows how to team up, to form entrepreneurial teams, to handle the statistics of success and failure, and that can gauge their quality of life, enhance it for themselves and others. So two very specific outcomes that I'd love to measure, in fact. One is entrepreneurial teams that multi-venture. Second, individuals that know how to measure their quality of life, enhance it for themselves and others. What is it that you try to achieve towards the end? If you can put it in like 2-3 statements, I would love that.
Yeah, so if I were to really double down, it would be to help learners find their ikigai. So an ikigai, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's a Japanese concept for purpose. It lies at the intersection of what the world needs, what you're good at, what can make you money, and there's a fourth intersection that's not coming to me right now, but it's at the connection of solving a problem, finding meaning and purpose, and at the same time ensuring you're participating meaningfully in society. Everyone's ikigai is different. So for some, it will be entrepreneurship. For others, it might be policy making. For someone else, it might be around the impact they have on their children. And everyone's ikigai is different. But if we can support learners on finding their own true ikigai, then I would be very fulfilled with our mission.
You know, I do believe you would have faced a challenge that I have faced, which is trying to introduce an innovative approach towards an education experience. But then at the same time, what is expected is that you show and how do you measure progress and be able to report it, okay? So you have the conventional, what everybody is used to see of reports and show of progress, which is legitimate, it's necessary. But then how do you deal with that? Adding to it the new elements that you are trying to introduce and continue to show progress. So how do you do that in School of Humanity?
It's a great question, and one, believe me, we've been asked many times, because we do have learners interested in a variety of pathways, and some of them want to go into traditional universities. I think the best advice I've received was from a fellow founder that was leading a really successful alternative university. And he said to me, look, the insides of the thing, the educational system you're building can be innovative, radical, so and so, but the packaging of especially things like the transcript, you might want to keep traditional. And I'll give you an example of how we do this. So we actually still have a GPA transcript combined with a portfolio-based transcript. But the way that the GPA is calculated is not from an exam. It's from the project-based assessments that we do. And learners can do these project-based assessments as many times as they wish. They can evidence them through their own projects rather than educator-led projects. We have rubrics instead of the standardized tests. But they ultimately produce a score, which you can do equivalency mapping with and produce a GPA. So it's one of those, I want to say, simple hacks that doesn't change the integrity of the system, but allows learners to come out with that kind of expectation of numbers that the system, that governments might be expecting, that universities might be expecting. I will say, though, as well, as I'm not actually against quantifying things. I think we need to at scale, and I do think naturally we need a way of knowing if learning has happened, and assessments are critical to that. It's just about reimagining how we assess those things and how we evidence those things.
How was your experience? And yeah, under which jurisdiction, by the way, the School of Humanity falls in? And how was your experience in dealing with authorities, let me say? What are the challenges that you face, if any? And then I'm gonna ask you the question on dealing with parents. How was their experience with the school? So let's start with the government and then move to parents.
Absolutely, yeah. We were very deliberate to choose to license our online high school out of a jurisdiction that would give us freedom, which is why we are licensed as an American online high school. We're internationally accredited as an American online high school. And we also chose Florida as our state. We're very lucky as a result of that to have almost complete freedom, given that there are still accreditation standards, which we believe are really reasonable standards that ensure that we're meeting for our quality of teaching and learning. I really want to use Florida as an example here. So Florida has very open regulations for the private system, and the public system also has more freedom. What I mean by that is, setting up a private school in Florida, you can pretty much, as long as you're maintaining safeguarding, do anything in terms of the curriculum and offering. At the same time, Florida has this thing called Universal ESAs, Education Savings Account, which is a movement in the United States where the government is allocating public funding to parents, public funding for education to parents if they choose to take their kids out of a public school. And if they're homeschooling instead, you can basically get the allocation, for example, that the public schools would have spent on your child to spend on alternatives. Now, a lot of people might hear all of this and fear the implications of such a model. But the interesting thing is that Florida continues to rank as a top state in the US in terms of educational attainment. This includes things like SATs and success in universities, as well as parent satisfaction. So I use it as an example to show that more stringent regulations doesn't always translate to a better education system. In fact, the opposite sometimes might be the case, which is why the Florida Department of Education calls it a school choice mandate. It's all about giving parents, learners, families choice to find the model that works best for them. And by creating an educational system that allows alternatives, that allows really innovative models, parents have more choice to find the option that works best for their children.
That's beautiful. I wasn't aware of that.
It's very under the radar globally, but ESAs especially are
How do
taking
they
a
measure?
huge,
How do they keep an eye on such a school as an authority?
They don't. You just have to do an annual filing, safeguarding. For example, you have to ensure you're doing background checks. The heads of schools do background checks. If you have a physical school, there's campus
So
inspection.
it's left for the parents to
It's left for
whether
the
love
parents
it or
to
not
decide.
love it.
Exactly.
It's not up to the authorities to state whether it's a good
not.
school or
now,
not.
accreditation bodies.
Isn't that a
will
very
have- yeah.
innovative idea? Does that make logic?
Well, okay, here's the thing. You don't have to go that far. I'll use another country's
No, I love
example.
it. Let me say it. I love that idea.
Another example is Netherlands, let's say. So Netherlands as well has a lot of alternative schools. What they did is they have an inspection framework like the UAE does. They have the traditional inspection framework, and they created another one for special schools. These are schools that are pedagogically really unique, like Waldorf schools, Montessori schools. Sometimes they're religious schools. And there's a school in Netherlands called Agora School. It's a school with no classrooms, no teachers, no grades. It's a completely different model.
That's a school I want to be in.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. But it's not like they're not inspecting. They just recognize you can't go into these schools and take the industrial era standards and apply them into the context. It doesn't work. So they created a different framework for progressive schools. That's another solution,
Such a beautiful idea. Imagine a school similar to a lot of things we do nowadays, whereby you choose an experience when consuming things like buying, so like going to Amazon and like choosing a product based on ratings. So imagine a school that picks up because the rating is high due to parents feeling very satisfied with their experience, probably a mix between parents' experience and students' experience. And you'd go for a school or a university based on the public rating. But tell me then, if somebody goes through the experience and gets kind of a certificate acknowledged by the Florida State of Education.
And an internationally accredited one, yeah.
And international. So, and then I want to go for Harvard.
Yes.
How would they are usually stringent with their selection criteria. I mean, how would they consider something like this?
Yes, there have been many cases of students from progressive schools going to Ivies. Like so the U.S. is actually the easier nut to crack when it comes to universities. Now, some universities are bringing back SAT requirements, but those are relatively easy to hack compared to, let's say, A-levels or IB, in that you can prepare for 3 to 6 months and take the SATs. But a vast majority of schools in the U.S. are test optional. And, a lot of them might have GPA requirements, but we have a GPA transcript. But because there are so many alternative schools, because there are so many homeschoolers in the US, it's the largest homeschooling market. Other movements like microschooling are on the rise. Universities in the US are deeply familiar with how to assess such learners, and they take a very holistic approach to admissions. Where things get a bit more complicated is in Europe and UK, where qualifications such as AP, A-levels are still a requirement by most universities. The way that we're hacking that in the short term is that for the learners that want to go study in those countries, we are benchmarking some of our advanced credits against the APs, which is like the American A-levels, and they might still need to take 2 or 3 exams if they're applying to a really traditional UK-based university. Last thing I will say is we're very lucky to be living or doing what we're doing through a time where alternative universities are also on the rise. Have you heard of Minerva University by any chance? Minerva University, so they are more selective than Harvard. They've been around for over a decade now. They've had alumni go on to do extraordinary things, and they're a very progressive university where you learn by doing. It's interdisciplinary, it's skill-based. A lot of our learners want to go to universities like that. So there's this natural alternative pathway that's emerging where you can do a different kind of schooling and then go into a different kind of university and come out really future-ready. And that's ultimately what I'm excited about in terms of the paths that we're creating for our learners.
That's beautiful. Let me ask you about the parents' experience, or your experience with parents.
Yeah.
Okay. And how did it go? How did it evolve? I wouldn't think it was a walk in the park to start with.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah?
I mean, the whole marketing thing for a school like ours is not a walk in the park, because what you're doing is changing narratives about education, which is such a difficult task. Like if I ask most human beings to close their eyes and imagine a school, we tend to imagine a similar kind of thing. There's classrooms, there's a teacher, there's a curriculum. And what the team and I were tasked with was really ultimately changing mindsets as we were promoting our school. So when we first started, we didn't really know who exactly it was for. We knew that there were people out there dissatisfied, but we didn't know geographically where they would come from, or if this was more of a Western thing or if it was global. one of the things we learned very quickly is that the dissatisfaction with education system is global. Like right in our founding cohort, we had learners from US, UK, Nigeria, Pakistan, UAE. Now we've expanded to 23 countries. The furthest west is a learner in Japan, and the furthest east is the learner in the west coast of the US, and everything in between. So I'm sharing this because parents globally are looking for alternatives. Like there's a growing early adopter market, let's say, for a different kind of schooling. I think
And what do you think is the
Yeah.
common denominator amongst those parents?
I mean, it goes back
What's their characteristics?
Okay, there's a variety of reasons. One is a lot of these parents are forward-looking, entrepreneurial. They're reading about what the future looks like, and they're seeing the mismatch between the schooling system and that future. So philosophically, they're just opting out. There's also a category of parent whose child is just not thriving in the education system. It's just not working for them.
A lot of what needs to be done is not educating the kids, is actually educating the parents for them to see the future. And whose responsibility is that?
It's a great question. That's beyond me. Honestly, I think it will take generations. And I probably think what will happen is you'll have a generation of learners go through models like this, like our schools, and you'll see the impact compared to the generations that stayed in this rigid system. And that will take time.
Funny speaking, we were talking about this. And yesterday I had this discussion with the team here at the school. And there was this whole discussion because, Citizens as an education experience is highly focused on entrepreneurship. And I've realized that the vast majority don't understand what entrepreneurship is. So a lot of them think entrepreneurship is just, building a business and being the businessman or woman. And I'm saying, no, actually, entrepreneurship, yes, it is a generic word. It can have a million things under it, but it's actually a lifestyle. And the major difference between the lifestyle of an entrepreneur and the lifestyle of a normal employee is in my opinion, is their ability to do 2 or 3 things very well. One is finding a problem and trying to figure out some kind of a solution. Second is being able to evolve and develop teams, because to solve a problem, you need a team. And to produce products and services, you need teams. And third, and most importantly, is how to deal with risk, how to handle it, how to statistically attend to it, how to psychologically manage it, and live with it. Because in entrepreneurship, failure is the norm, statistically. Yeah? So we all know that 1 out of 10 companies survive beyond 3 years. So failure is by far the norm. And success is the absolute exception. Yeah? Whereby in the lifestyle of an employee, many of these factors are not a concern. And what I'm trying to do is to prepare as many as possible of the future generation for the harder option of a lifestyle, which is entrepreneurship. If they choose to go for that lifestyle, they will be ready for it. If they don't, the lifestyle of an employee is another option. It's a lifestyle choice. Yeah, there's not. When asked, which one is better, is which one are you ready for? Yeah. So if someone would choose the lifestyle of an entrepreneur, then they better be ready for it. And schools in the last 200 years did not prepare for that option because of what I've explained. It was not the problem that they needed to attend to. They need a lot of employees that get things done in time. They don't make mistakes. And this is why I think a lot of people, stress and anxiety is the disease of the century. It's because we are not exposing them enough to the statistics of life, failure and all of that. So I am trying to prepare as many as possible to the harder lifestyle option, for that if they choose that, they are ready. And that's our responsibility. What is it that we are trying to do? but to ready generations for the future. So if we don't give them the right experiences for any option they would like to go for, then have we delivered on our objective or promise? I think we would fail if we don't. I would like to hear from you. And where is the region when it comes to such experiences? Where do you think the region should go? And what are the few steps that they need to take in order to be up there with the likes of Florida? I mean, I have to say that I was not really aware of this. And this is the beauty of DisruptEd, is that can we help disrupt the education sector for the region? And that's, in my opinion, if we are able to help a bit, we will enhance people's quality of life. And what is a better mission? Am I right? And that's why I believe you called it the School of Humanity.
Absolutely, yeah. I think the region is such an interesting place because obviously, I mean, Dubai and UAE is one of the most progressive, forward-looking places in the world. How many countries have a vision, a 100-year plan, right? And an actual strategy for the future, especially in today's world. So from a vision perspective, that's not lacking. I think the challenges in the region continue to be regulations. That continues to be gridlock. I mean, just one example, online schools and degrees are still not attested or legalized as equivalent in today's world, right? With the digital era we live in, we've had decades now of data from online universities, online high schools that have been widely successful. And we still have that regional block. And it's not just the UAE, it's in the countries in the region. So I think the biggest challenge is regulation. I think the demand is there. You know, it's a huge homeschooling market growing in this part of the world for a reason, because parents want alternatives. The regulations, I'm not even going to say need to change. I think the region would benefit very much by creating a sandbox, similar to what Netherlands did, creating an alternative framework for progressive schools and allowing that experiment to happen, and embrace failure along the way. Sometimes my fear is because it's such an inspection-heavy part of the world that you will have a progressive school pop up one day, but because it's so new and because it takes time to refine new models of education that we give up on it. So I think it's really important to have both a long-term strategy as well as this alternative regulation system. I understand changing the status quo will take a lot of investment and time. I'm not even advocating for that. But can we create space for an alternative framework? I don't know, give 10 schools or 10 education providers, a mix of local founders and those that are proven it abroad, the opportunity to actually pilot a completely different approach and give them the regulatory freedom to do so and see the impact of that, not over a few years, but over 10 plus years. And then can we use that to then drive innovation?
Have you had that discussion with the authorities around?
I mentioned it in my thought leadership.
You know what I think?
Yeah.
I think let's use this platform, DisruptEd,
Sure.
and evolve, maybe put on a white paper or something, and send it to the authorities. I mean, I do know their concern is to be, they want to safeguard and secure both students and parents' experience. I do know that they want to evolve and disrupt. How can we make it easier for them without jeopardizing what their main concern has to be, like give them solutions? Yeah. Yes, yeah. I am in multiple industries, as you probably know, and I faced a lot of this across, like in the healthcare industry. Now currently I'm facing the same with financial services, in education, the same story. I think the overall direction of few governments in the region is that they want to find ways to disrupt, at least at the higher level. And if we are able to send the message and give them a framework, some of them will take a leap of faith and experiment. I do believe that an entrepreneur like yourself have went through few of your own failures. Would you give me one failure that you believed have taught you a lot and has shaped you to be the entrepreneur you are today?
Oh, there's so many. I think I'm going to go back to my university experience. It wasn't a complete failure, but I went into it thinking I was going to graduate into a certain career path, and that didn't happen. And I actually didn't do very well in university. I learned a few things. One, to be authentic to myself. Having gone into the experience, I was quite in denial of the fact that it wasn't right for me. I wanted it to work so bad. So even though I didn't enjoy the experience or I wasn't performing well, it was like, I'm just going to keep pushing at it. And I think the lesson I've learned is just admit when things aren't okay. And the second thing is the classic entrepreneurship word, it's pivot, change your mind. And I say this to learners all the time, is keep an open mind. You might try something, realize it's not for you, and change your mind. And I think it took me a few years to be willing to adopt, like, okay, at any point I can change my mind and decide it's not for me. And if I could point to another big failure in my life, in a sense, was my first company right after university that I worked on. It failed for a variety of reasons, but it was very difficult to let go of emotionally as an entrepreneur. The lesson I learned from that is to focus on a problem, not a company. The solution can change. The company might change as you figure out what the solution is. But if you stay focused on the problem as an entrepreneur, you'll ultimately get to it if you keep pivoting.
Fantastic. I love this session. Thank you very much.
Me too. Thank you.
I think this is exactly what Disrupted is all about, is that we challenge the norm for the benefit of humanity, for the benefit of future generations. I'd like to thank the audience for giving us your time. I'd like to thank you ahead of your comments. We'd love to see your comments in here. If you have, kindly share your thoughts, your questions. This will guide us in order for us all together to evolve the education experience in this region. For the ones that would love to reach you and understand more your education experience, how is it best to do that?
There's a variety of ways. You can go to the School of Humanity website, which is sofhumanity.com. I'm on LinkedIn as well, Raya Bidshahri, and I'm regularly posting about our progress and what we're learning. And we are also on Instagram, Facebook, all the social media channels. So if you just search School of Humanity, I'm sure you'll find us.
We are linked on LinkedIn.
I think we are, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This
really
was such a
appreciate
thought-provoking discussion.
Fantastic.
And an amazing platform.